can listen to The Front on your smart speaker every morning. To hear the latest episode, just say, play the news from The Australian.
From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Tuesday, June 25. The Albanese government is to tell the Aboriginal Justice Service, NAJA, to show leadership on family violence. That's after The Australian's revelation its chairman beat up his pregnant partner. The lead author of the government's Defence Strategic Review has warned the debate over Peter Dutton's nuclear energy plan has the potential to run off the rails and turn Australians off nuclear altogether, a threat to the Navy's future submarine program. That story's live now at theaustralian.com.au. A fresh scandal is engulfing the UK's Conservative Party, with allegations 5 people, including a police officer with links to Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, bet on the election date before Sunak announced when it would be. Voting is in just 2 weeks, and everyone's betting Labor's Keir Starmer will be PM. But there's something about Starmer, a dashing former human rights barrister, that might surprise you.
Hello, darling.
How's it going?
Torture. Your mother's trying to fix you up with some divorcee. Human rights barrister. Pretty nasty beast, apparently.
Who? Ding dong. Maybe this time Mum had got it right.
Come on. Why don't we see Mark?
One of the greatest characters in modern movie history is Mr Darcy, played by Colin Firth in the Bridget Jones's Diary franchise. He was a charming, handsome, almost unbearably pompous lawyer, named after Fitzwilliam Darcy, the hero of Jane Austen's 1813 masterpiece, Pride and Prejudice.
Mother, I do not need a blind date, particularly not with some verbally incontinent spinster who smokes like a chimney, drinks like a fish and dresses like her mother.
His nemesis and rival for Bridget's affections was suave TV executive Daniel Cleaver, played by Hugh Grant, a cad for the ages. Their fight scenes, 2 men who don't know how to fight scrabbling at each other, are cinema classics.
Darcy, do you have any idea what century we actually live in?
Are you going to step outside or am I going to have to drag you?
You're going to have to drag me.
They fall into a fountain and have the least dignified brawl ever caught on film.
You know what, mate? If you're so obsessed with Bridget Jones, why don't you just marry her? Because then she'd definitely shag me.
It has long been rumoured, ever since it came out, that Keir Starmer was the inspiration for Mr Darcy, the handsome but slightly stuffy human rights lawyer who is the great love of Bridget Jones and Bridget Jones's Diary.
Richard Ferguson is the Australian's National Chief of Staff. We should note that Helen Fielding, the author of the Bridget Jones books, has denied basing Mr Darcy on Keir Starmer.
I think it's hard not to see him as a kind of Mr Darcy figure. Keir Starmer has led an incredibly interesting life, very much a lawyer rather than a politician, never really involved in student politics, ended up in the chief prosecutor in England.
Here's how Britain's Channel 4 News framed it.
I used to run the Crown Prosecution Service. I was Director of Public Prosecutions. Director of Public Prosecutions.
He wants you to know about these 5 years in his career, the job for which he was knighted.
I've taken down terrorist gangs in my past.
Had some controversies, for example, he never prosecuted the terrible BBC personality and later revealed mass paedophile Jimmy Savile.
The evidence is now overwhelming that one of Britain's most beloved entertainers, the late Sir Jimmy Savile, was also a predatory sex offender.
But he was considered to be a very tough-on-crime prosecutor, went for big sentences, and then he joined the Labour Party, got into Parliament in 2015,
That was when David Cameron's Conservatives scraped into coalition government, leaving Labour, Ed Miliband and Starmer on the opposition benches.
So he thought he was joining kind of the new Ed Miliband government after a rackety coalition between the Tories and the Liberal Democrats. Instead, he's been forced to live his years in opposition, and live his years in opposition under Jeremy Corbyn.
Corbyn was the hard-left Labour leader whom Starmer would eventually replace after a thumping defeat of Labour at the 2019 election.
And it has made him a ruthless figure, but also a very safe and sometimes people would say slightly Gallabella figure when it comes to policy in particular.
Starmer is promising to rebuild the public health system, a clean energy transformation, and he's sent a chill through the middle classes with a plan to put the broad-based VAT tax on private schools.
It's a very Daniel Andrews-esque policy. It's essentially putting up what we would call the GST on private school fees. Now, private schools have a little bit of a different relationship, I think, than here in Australia. I think a lot more people use private schools in Australia than they would in Britain. But it has slightly dented his attempts to portray himself as somebody who supports aspiration, as somebody who supports people who want to grow wealth. After Jeremy Corbyn, who is a Marxist, admitted by his own admission, he had worked very hard to try and re-establish Labour as a party that can work with business. It's a more kind of classic Labour corporatist, sort of soft socialist left, probably a little bit like Anthony Albanese.
So he's not going to tear down the establishment?
He's definitely not going to tear down the establishment. He does have a knighthood after all. He is Sir Keir Starmer. He's really made a point of trying to reintroduce patriotism into the Labour Party. Of course, Jeremy Corbyn famously didn't sing God Save the Queen, was an avid Republican, turned up to tripping the colour in donkey jackets and things like that. He is very much portrayed himself as a supporter of the King, obviously a supporter of the late Queen. He does want to make changes to the House of Lords. He wants to stop all Lords over the age of 80 being active participants in the second chamber. He wants to get rid of hereditary peers and people who become Lords by birth. The manifesto is that eventually the House of Lords will be abolished. And I mean, this has been the opinion of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown as well. But it's a bit like the Republican Australia for the Labour Party. It might sound good in theory, but I think when it comes to the practice, they're less keen to run into it. But I think that's another example of how this is not a Prime Minister who's going to tear down the establishment anytime soon. This is no Jeremy Corbyn.
This campaign kicked off last month in a downpour. It was the campaign launch, a snap election called by PM Rishi Sunak in an attempt to get the jump on Labour, complete with a Churchill-esque speech out the front of 10 Downing Street. But Sunak's team clearly forgot to look out the window first, and seconds after Sunak opened his mouth, the heavens opened and he was drenched.
Over the next few weeks, I will fight for every vote. I will earn your trust.
And then someone with a loudspeaker started blasting Sunak with Things Can Only Get Better, the 1990s anthem and Labour's unofficial theme song.
China is looking to dominate the 21st century by stealing a lead in technology. And migration is being weaponised by hostile states to threaten the integrity of our borders.
I think your takeout from his appearance in the rain was that he was a bit of a drip. Now, has his campaign improved at all since the beginning?
No, he's not. He's not just a drip. He's a whole soaking puddle. I mean, he's lost in the puddle. It may be the most disastrous political campaign in modern Western politics since, who knows? I mean, he makes Bill Shorten and Theresa May look like campaign geniuses, makes Hillary Clinton look like a competent campaigner.
You know, to just be grossly generalistic, you could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. Right? The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it.
It's been a terrible campaign, and it's not all of his fault, but a lot of it is his fault. He has no eye for politics, unfortunately. The skipping of D-Day was a complete and utter disaster, which I think killed his campaign stone dead.
That's where Sunak flew home early from D-Day commemorations in France to give an interview to ITV that delivered one of the most toe-curlingly awkward moments in modern politics.
Have you ever gone without something?
Yeah, I mean, my family emigrated here with very little, and that's how I was raised. I was raised with the values of hard work.
What did you go without as a child?
I went out with lots of things, right? Because my parents wanted to put everything into our education, and that was a priority.
So what sort of things had to be sacrificed?
Lots of things, right?
Can you give me an example
all
of
sorts of things. So, like lots of people, there'll be all sorts of things that I would have wanted as a kid that I couldn't have, right? Famously, Sky TV. So that was something that we never had growing up, actually.
This scandal where members of the top Tory campaign team are now being investigated for betting on the election date because they had found out the election date before the Prime Minister announced it has, I think, shocked people, and it is reminiscent of the Partygate scandals under Boris Johnson, where people were having parties during COVID lockdowns, Tory staffers were having parties during COVID lockdowns, in which it seems to be one rule for Tory staffers and one rule for everybody else. His top cabinet ministers are basically out there admitting they're not going to win and that it's all about stopping Labour from having a massive majority. And he looks completely defeated, Rishi Sunak. He looks as if he doesn't want to be there. I think he's thinking about his next job in Silicon Valley, but it's a very sad end for the Tory party's 14 years of power.
There are predictions, hard to fathom, that the Tories could see their 344 seats chipped down to just 100 in Britain's 650-seat House of Commons. That would be worse than the Conservatives' nadir, the 1906 election, when they were reduced to just 156 seats. Coming up, the populist firebrand who's stealing all Sunak's thunder. The Australian's full of expert analysis from politics to business. We'd love you to join our subscribers and always be the smartest person in the room. Check us out at theaustralian.com.au and we'll be back after this break. There's certainly a dynamic voice on the Conservative side of UK politics, but it's not one of the Tories. It's Nigel Farage, the populist anti-Europe campaigner who's now turned his attention to securing Britain's borders.
Nigel Farage really came on the scene to advocate for Britain's exit from the European Union, really before it was popular. In many ways, one of the reasons that David Cameron called the Brexit referendum in 2016 was to head off Nigel Farage doing what Nigel Farage appears to be doing now, which is completely gobbling up the Tory vote. Now, he ended up doing very well when he formed something called the Brexit Party, when Theresa May was failing to get Brexit done. He ran again, obviously, in 2019, but didn't do very well because Boris Johnson managed to get a lot of that vote that he was taking back. But this time, he's been able to really establish himself as a very, very powerful voice. He has made a major stumble, though, I think, in that he's basically revealed himself as soft on Putin.
Hang on a second. We've provoked this war. It's, of course it's his fault. He's used what we've done as an excuse. But we provoked the invasion of Ukraine. Yes, and very interestingly, once again, 10 years ago when I predicted this, by the way, I'm the only person in British politics that predicted what would happen. And of course, everyone said I was a pariah for daring to suggest it.
He said that the EU had a lot to blame for the situation in Ukraine, and I think a lot of traditional Tories who are very anti-Russia and very pro-Ukraine may be turned off by that. So I think that was a mistake on his part. But things are looking good for him. He's running in Clacton, which is a seaside town, which has the second oldest population of all the electorates in Britain. So I think he'd have a very good chance there. But famously, he did say before he decided to run in this election, which was not a sure thing, he said, do I really want to spend every weekend in Clacton? Well, let's see what the voters say about that.
Richard Ferguson is the Australian's National Chief of Staff. You can check out all our journalism right now by joining our subscribers at theaustralian.com.au.